I'd like to talk to you briefly on the antiquity of the Indian people. How old are the Indian people? So far, what I told you is Indians are not a new people. They not come newly from Central Asia or other such places, chasing the Harappans to the south. It is not that way. In my talks at SangamTalks, I've got several things that talk about paleontology, archaeology, where I've shown human presence going back to 1 million years before present in southern India, Homo erectus. I've shown Narmada man, who lived about 350,000 years ago in Narmada Valley. His cranial capacity was about 1,400 cubic centimeters, which is like the modern human being, whereas the Homo erectus had a cranial capacity of 1000 cc, average in Africa, Southeast China, and other places. But in India, this specimen had a higher cranial capacity. So people are asking, what is this specimen? Is it already a Homo sapien or what is it? Then in Athirampakam in Tamil Nadu, we got evidence of stone tools made by a superior intelligence about 350,000 years ago. Then obviously all over India, cave art is there and several underwater artifacts and so on. Bottom line, in every time frame, we can show India is a settled country in the archaeological record, paleontological record. We can show that it is a settled country. Then there are people who have studied the antiquity of Indians by looking at the DNA records. Early DNA looked at the gender chromosomes, the X and Y. So for the woman, they look at the maternal mitochondrial DNA, empty DNA. And for the male, they look at the Y chromosome. The methodology is, if you had an ancient ancestor and he had a mutation in his genes, that mutation will be inherited by his descendants. Let's call that mutation A, happened 100,000 years ago. But maybe later on, somebody in that descendant chain got a new mutation, B. So his descendants will have A and B, whereas somebody else might have C, D, and so on. So bottom line, we can construct what are called phylogenetic trees by looking at the mutation and trying to figure out how old these are. So the studies say L0 to L6 mutations happened in Africa. Out of Africa, the M and N lineages are in India. All the non-African population of the world is derived from M and N. So in other words, it says that the entire world outside of Africa was populated by people living in India with this M and N mutations. And this map shows you that these are the ages from 200,000 years ago, 90,000 years ago. L0 to L6 is in Africa. Then you see this lineage coming into India, M, N, and R, and then going into Europe, then into Central Asia, North and South America, Australia, and so on. This is what has been reconstructed by several scientists today. And the same thing is in Y chromosomes too. I mean, women can't do it alone. It's got to be a male too, right? So you see the same thing. A0 to C, these are all in Africa. F, G, H, I, J, K, L, and R are the male lineages in India. And all the remaining male populations of the world, non-African, are from this male population. And this map shows you similarly, early ones here, out of Africa into India. It's a lot more messier than the empty DNA, but we can track the similar kind of movements over here too. Stephen Oppenheimer tried to show in 2003 what I'm saying. I like it because it is illustrated. It gives a nice mental picture. So he says that the modern Homo sapien before 150,000 years ago lived in Africa. Then approximately 85 to 75,000 years ago, a group of people left Africa and hugged this triangular part of India all the way to Sumatra and other such places. This is a generation by generation migration. It is not some group of people walking till they reach Australia. It is not that. Generation by generation migration. And they did not go this side because there was one more species of humans called Neanderthals. Neanderthals lived in Europe. They did not want to confront them, so they were living like this. Then we know 74,000 years ago, there was a super volcano, not an ordinary volcano, but a super volcano in Sumatra that deposited 5 meters of ash in India and Pakistan. Even today in Jwalapuram in Andhra Pradesh, Kurnool district, the researcher there, Ravi Korisetta, he's an archaeologist, they have found ash layer. They found human settlements below the ash layer, then the ash layer. Above the ash layer, they again found human settlements, meaning that India was repopulated. This event caused the near extinction of the human race, right? It is estimated that only about 10,000 adults survived this event. You and I are present here because your ancestor was among this 10,000 people. I wanted to think about that. If this theory is right, then we are here because of this population happened with these 10,000 people, adults over here. So this put so much of particulate matter in the atmosphere that we had 1,000 years of ice age that happened over here. That's what this one is saying. Then once again India was repopulated. Then 65,000 years ago, ice ages ended in Europe, and ice ages ended, the Neanderthal also died out. We don't know why they died out, but they died out. When that happened, Indians from this part of India drifted to the Bosphorus and settled down there, becoming the future proto-Europeans, if you will. And by 45,000 years ago, from Eastern India, Western India, from Sumeria, groups of people have joined, gone to Central Asia, crossed the Bering Strait 25,000 years ago, and become the North and South Americans. So this gives you a picture of how such a peopling of India is of the world is taking place. This paper came about 2 months back. Like I said, if these people came from India, triangular part of India, going up to Laos and Sumatra 75,000 years ago, this paper said you have to push the date to 86,000 years ago in Laos. That means in India also, that migration probably has to be pushed back much, much earlier. That is what this is saying. I don't expect you to read all these things, okay? So don't get worried. So people wanted to see who are the Indians genetically early on. So they said, supposing here I take your mutations, how many mutations you have, next person how many he has. So this entire room I see, for example, I may have some mutations common with you, but you may have something special and so on. So if I take the sum total of all the mutations we have, if I want to find out what is the genetic distance from me to some other person, I can make a mathematical formula that says, I have this marker, do you have that marker? If you don't, there is some distance. And then similarly, I have this marker, you too have it, it does not. So they do something called fixation index, FST. That's a mathematical measure that talks about the genetic distance between different people. Their hope was, we can cluster the Indians into North Indians, into South Indians, into Brahmin gene, Kshatriya gene, Shudra gene, Dravidian, Aryan, and so on. To their surprise, any number of studies have found you cannot do this clustering. You cannot cluster it into Northern Indian, Southern Indian, Aryan, Dravidian, Brahmin, Kshatriya. Such a thing is not possible. Uttarakhand, the people did the studies reported here. They say these numbers are so mixed, you cannot cluster it. There is no Chaturvarna visible in these paternal records according to them over there. This is from Andhra Pradesh, various tribal communities, so-called Dravidian, so-called Aryan identities with languages. They said there's no way we can find out any clustering possible. They are all mixed and the numbers are. Same thing in Karnataka and Kerala. This is a national study by a foreign group and they too came out to the same conclusion. So bottom line, if anybody comes and tells you that we are Aryans, Dravidians at the genetic level, say it's utter nonsense because our FST shows we are such mixed population, you cannot say any such thing. There is no such clustering. That is why I say the identities of Aryans and Dravidians are spurious. At the genetic level, there is no such thing as race. Race is a social construct. It is not a scientific construct. Scientifically, if you can say these markers constitute a race, if you define it that way, I'm willing to listen. But then there is no such definition of race at all. There is no Aryans, no Dravidians at this level.